Welcome everybody to our second lecture for the first week of class. Just as a reminder, this is CSC 744 Software Development Leadership for the fall semester 2014. So I believe nobody should have that mistake if you're watching this video, but just in case, I wanted to throw that out there. It does happen from time to time. So today, I just cover a few things here, kind of administrative stuff as far as the site goes and further defining expectations for the the semester, as well as we'll just continue to talk about some leadership principles. And as I mentioned earlier this week, or at the last lecture anyway, we're going to talk about that for the next few lectures. So we're just going to keep in that kind of that mindset for a while. And a lot of this will be just discussion. Okay, don't anticipate an assignment or a project or anything anytime real soon in the next couple weeks at least, as we get through some of this material, because it's more big picture. It's a little harder to derive assignments from, and just management issues, leadership issues that I want to discuss and talk about because I think they're really important. Of course, as a course based off of leadership. So with D2L, you can see there hasn't been a ton of activity here. Holy cow. We've got the link to the course videos. I will be providing those via YouTube this semester, so hopefully that works well for everybody. If you run into any issues with those, please let me know. I'm recording on a MacBook, and for whatever reason, MacBooks generate very large file sizes, so I'm going to try to keep the lectures relatively short. Of course, every time I say that, I end up making 40 and 50-minute lectures, so I guess there's the warning or caution or caveat to that. Inside, you'll see, and we discussed this on the last lecture, the discussion section. And that I just highly encourage you at this point to go in there and make an introduction and then participate in the first week's conversation or topic. I will define or better define the the relation, the discussion will play with the course and probably assign some points or something to it as part of our overall grade. So just simply the participation of. I'll post that in E2L, and it'll be something that we'll need to look at moving forward for sure. So that'll be a part of it. As I mentioned earlier, any assignments or projects or anything, there's still a couple weeks off, and when we get to that point, I will let you know in advance and give you plenty of time to work on it. So we'll get there soon. Let's see, if there's any issues with the forums here, please let me know. I don't use the forums a tremendous amount, and D2L has changed a bit over the summer, and so if you just simply don't have access or you can't even see them, let me know, because I will get that fixed right away. I don't want to let my inability here to get these set up correctly be a limitation for you. All right, if you have any questions though, please send me an email, let me know. I look forward to seeing your guys' comments here in the forums as we move through this week and the rest of the semester. All right, so what I did is I just added a few more slides to the previous slide deck that I was talking off of. I'll upload those just in case you want them. But again, a lot of this content is very subjective. It's very much an art, at least in my opinion, as there are no hard and fast rules for becoming a good manager or becoming a good leader in an organization. So what I'm going to use these for is an opportunity to bring up these points, to discuss them, to get you thinking about them, and then to hopefully help fuel and facilitate at least the discussion early on in the semester. As we move into more computer science topics, we'll move out of that discussion realm, because then we can start looking at code and sharing code with each other, giving our opinions and our advice and stuff like that. So I'm going to have these slides, and there's going to be a lot of questions in here. And again, I'll just use them to kind of focus my thoughts and talk through things and some of the experiences that I've had over the years. I'm using the book, the Managing the Unmanageable book, which is not required, but I'm just using that as more or less a resource to help focus and organize my thoughts. So if you did purchase the book, we are, let's see, I think I'm more or less chugging along through chapter 1, chapter 2, and then I'll pick and choose as we go. It's not a very heavy read, but it just provides a lot of insightful information from people that have been in the industry for a lot longer than I have and led much bigger teams at much bigger organizations that I've ever worked for. So as we move into, last semester or last lecture, we talked about kind of leadership and bigger picture. What is the role of the manager? Now we're going to look at how, talk a little bit more about understanding programmers, how programmers are perceived, how they perceive themselves, how they project themselves, and how we work with them. So one of the first questions that I ask, or is often asked, is, are all programmers alike? And I think we know the answer to that is obviously not. I very rarely meet any single group of programmers or two programmers that are. I've never met anyone obviously that's exactly the same. You get team cultures that develop when you have a group of developers that work together for a very long period of time, or through a very intense experience that causes them to form a closer relationship much quicker. I see this a lot in the military, and it happens almost everybody when they go through something like basic training or they go to war, where they're set into a situation or an environment where it's very stressful, and it creates, it just makes bonds form, cohesion happen, usually pretty quickly, or at least it can. It facilitates that in a much quicker, much more rapid time span or time frame than your normal, your normal business environment where you're working 8 to 5 and maybe the stress level isn't extreme. But they're all individuals. At the core of it, they're all individuals, and we need to understand that and recognize that and then build off of it with our teams. A bigger picture question would be then are all programmers viewed as alike? And I think oftentimes they really are. I've worked in a variety, as I mentioned in the last lecture, a variety of industries, as well as a freelancer and a contractor for the last 10 or 12 years. And so I've been in a lot of different environments, and I've seen a lot of different teams and organizations. And oftentimes, programmers really are seen as just kind of the programmers. They're given some of those stereotypical attributes that we talked about last semester, that they can be cynical, they can be hard to work with, they can be non-communicative, they can be jerks, they can be cynics, they can be all these things. We'll talk a little bit more about that today as well. But it's easy then for the outside, someone that is not managing or working with that team or is a part of that team, to just lump them in. This becomes an issue when you have an organization where, I guess, for example, I worked at one where we had a team of 4 or 5 developers, and one of the developers was the primary lead for our client support application. And we were in a call center, and so what all the call center reps were using. And since that guy was a little bit gruff, we as a team got a reputation of all being that same way. The external appearance of us as a team was predominantly derived from that one programmer's interactions with those customers. And so as a manager, it's up to them to make sure that the impression, the appearance of the team isn't being simply defined by one person. And that goes for whether it's good or bad. If you have one guy that's out there, he's just an awesome rock star, and that is a good thing. We need to make sure then that when some of the maybe more difficult employees or the ones that don't play well with others are out there interacting with the clients or the customers, that you're tampering that and managing that relationship and the impression and how that team is viewed, because it plays a big role within an organization and how the rest of the organization wants to interact with them. If every time they think that every time they come to that dev team, they just get nothing but trouble, then they're going to start to find ways to work around the dev team. And that is not a good situation to be in, because then your team is not fulfilling the role that they're there to fill. And programmers typically get paid well. They're not certainly top of the line employees as far as executives. Well, IT programming type executives are, of course, but you're not typically seeing a lot of programmers that are pulling big high 6-figure salaries. But they typically have they're pretty good paid employees, and so it can quickly cause frustration in the organization if they're not, being a part of the overall team, the organizational team. As far as our management perspective goes, we oftentimes need to break down how we look at the programmer and the programming staff in order to help better manage the resources, manage the individuals, and manage the overall efforts. There's a variety of disciplines or perspectives we can look at. We can look at the programming disciplines themselves. We can look at the type of programmers, domain expertise, job requirements and abilities, proximity and relationship, general styles, and personnel styles. So we'll talk about a few of these here real quick. So the first one is programmers themselves and the programming disciplines. I can speak from experience that I oftentimes, when I work with a programmer or work with other programmers, and myself included, there's usually one discipline that I find or that is my claim to fame. This is the thing that I think I'm the best at. And I oftentimes see that with other programmers. While I meet a lot of programmers that say, yes, I can do a lot of things in a lot of different environments, there's usually one thing that stands out as the best. I do a lot of web development, so that's typically the thing that I stake my flag in, is that I am a good web developer because I've done it for a very long time. Database programmers, okay? I've worked with several DBAs, and that's what they do. That's what they love to do. They love working with the storage, organization, and extraction of data. We have server programmers and then client programmers. So, where do they spend the vast majority of their time, and what type of applications or programming are they focused on? Our client programmers are typically focused on the client side. Servers are typically focused on the server side. And with all these different disciplines, all these different roles, very broad here, the set of tools that they use and what they care about, what they're concerned about, the languages that they talk in, they all become different, right? DBAs, database programmers, database administrators, they are worried about a lot different things than someone as a web developer. As a web developer, and if I'm in an organization that has a DBA to support me, then I typically don't care about the database. I say, okay, I need this schema, I need this structure, I need this tables, I need to know how to access it, but how you structure it, how you organize it, what you index, how you harden the servers, I don't care about that because I don't have to. That's your job. And the DBA is. And each of us then has our different set of concerns and our different set of tools. And it's very easy for us to silo ourselves and only care about those things that we are tasked to provide results for and not care about the other. And so oftentimes, and again, I've worked in organizations where you get this kind of the silo effect, and overall things suffer because there isn't a lot of communication going on between the disciplines and the developers. And when you branch out a little bit broader, you look at like IT departments. Typically, the organizations that I've worked for keep the developers kind of in their own little world, and the system administrators, IT help desks, IT support in their own little world. But we're all part of the same, we're all achieving the same goals. You may have a DBA, but guess what? Sysadmins are the ones managing the servers. And then I'm the application programmer, and I'm the one that's writing the code that's putting data into and pulling data out of that database. And so we all need to be working together, understanding what our concerns are in order to provide the best product, the best results. And then that ties in, I think, directly, at least in my mind, to the security of an organization. And something that, again, there is, from my experience, like just kind of a lack of communication in that when let's just say, for example, we launch an application, and that application takes applications for a credit card. So it's for a bank or something. That's sensitive information, right? It's going to be handling users, all their personal information plus social security number. There are a lot of areas that we need to be very concerned about the security of that application. DBAs need to be storing the data sensitively. Web developers or client programmers need to be handling that information in a sensitive manner. That means not leaving it unencrypted for a long period of time. And then when that data is in transit, how is it communicated on the local area network between the web server and the database server? So we need our system administrators to make sure we have a secure environment. And then we need the overall hardening of the environment. Can somebody from the outside get access and penetrate our networks and steal this information? And so, again, we have all these different disciplines and all these different roles, and we need to, as managers, this is where I finally am getting in the manager part here, we need to, as managers or leaders, make sure that everybody is talking, everybody's working together, and everybody's ultimately out to achieve the same direction. So it becomes oftentimes a very big burden. No, I shouldn't say burden, but a challenge to make sure that all this communication is happening. Different types of programmers, I won't spend too much time here just because we kind of covered it in the disciplines. You have varying degrees of expertise is really all this is saying, and varying areas where people like to specialize or focus in. If I come to you looking for a job and I have 10 years of web development experience, and you want someone that's going to make drivers to support some software running on some new piece of equipment, I may not be the best fit. And so we generally have to be able to break programmers out to not only help identify the skill set, match the skill set they have to the skill set that we need, but then make sure that when we're pulling in new people, we're hiring new people, that we're attracting the right kind of person based off of the type of job posting that we provide. So, and again, we have engineers and architects, programmers, application programmers, system programmers, and not really programmers. And that's kind of a weird group if you've never thought about it, because there is a group of not really programmers that kind of get lumped in with the programming staff. a place I worked, again, credit card processing company, and we had one person on staff that did relatively technical stuff. He initiated FTP transfer processes, handled PGP keys, kicked off some of our information and reporting services, as well as provided reports. So dabbled in SQL a little bit every once in a while. And so while he wasn't a programmer, he kind of did some of those things that the tools, he would touch the tools and even some of the languages that the programmers or DBAs would use. So, there is kind of a weird group, and how do you handle them? Well, again, it just comes down to learning the role, defining the role, understanding what part they play, in the success or the mission of the organization, and then making sure that they're, provided the resources that they need to succeed, really. Job classifications, this has been one of those topics. Again, it seems kind of silly or kind of trivial, but it can have an impact, and it's varied. It's just so varied across the board. If you haven't done it in a while, go out to a job posting website and look for programming positions, and you'll just see titles abound, right? You'll see programmer analyst, you'll see software developer, you'll see web developer, you'll see application developer, you'll see system engineer, software engineer. There is no common way of classifying what we do, and so what we see is that we have, we need to be concerned about this from two perspectives. One is in hiring, when we're looking to bring new people in, whether that's a full-time, part-time employee, or trying to recruit or hire a contractor or outsourcing. Are we all speaking the same language? Are we all setting and defining the same expectations, what we expect to get from whoever that person is, however their relationship is defined, that we bring in to fulfill that role? And so it's kind of hard. And so I guess my best recommendation for this is to simply ensure that you're consistent with the classification. Look at others that do it successfully, and then make sure that you are doing the same thing. Make sure that you have some outside opinion on the job descriptions for hiring, the job postings that you hire, that they make sense. Have your technical staff, have your developers help design and develop that, so that it accurately reflects the skills that are needed. If you're looking at hiring, you should be in contact with your developers, your programmers, to not necessarily be a part of the hiring process, but at least in identifying the need and where the skills need to go, so what skills need to be hired. It also helps from a management perspective, because then it can create tools for, again, assigning people to the right teams or the right tasks on the teams. It gives us the ability to create promotion systems, and say that you need to be able to do these specific skills in order to classify as a programmer analyst from a 1 to a 2, programmer analyst 1 to a programmer analyst 2, or from entry-level developer to mid-level, or from mid to senior. And so it gives us some metric. Again, it's very hard to say these are the things I need to see from you, and I can match those up 100%. Okay, it's just a rough guideline in order to give you something as a tool to help give your employees a focus, as well as you to organize them. It's very rare that someone goes into an environment and they don't want to know what is their career path here, at least not in my experience. Whenever I go somewhere and I work somewhere, it's one of the first things I want to know if I'm in an interview. So what's the career path? What does it take essentially for me to make more money and get more responsibility? And not everybody's going to have that perspective, but these are part of those tools that allow you to help answer those questions. Budgeting and force management, of course, this helps with that. Defining the roles, defining the pay scales, and then determining how you're going to fill those. This is all the tools for that. Titles, as I mentioned, they're hard. What's the difference between a programmer analyst 3, and a senior developer? It's all going to depend on the organization. I have a sample job posting here that we can just take a look at real quick. Boy, I don't know what's going on with this system. This is weird. Oh, no, that's not it. There it is. Okay, so this is for a company local to the DSU, Madison, South Dakota area, and just using it because they are actively looking to fill this position. and it came across my desk, so we can just use it to kind of look at the things we're talking about and see how this particular company is implementing it. So, again, we know, or we can assume, at least I would assume, that the way that they've described this position, the way that they've defined the qualifications here at the bottom, and then up at the top here, min experience, max experience, the position itself, the travel requirement. Is this position promotable to a manager, possible in the future? This is all part of the, how they classify their programmers internally. Okay, so here's a software developer. Okay, very ambiguous to me. It doesn't say is this entry level or mid or senior. So it sounds like from the reading of this actual application that's kind of up in the air. Full-time, of course, we need to know that. Full or part-time, min and max experience, again, they're not defining that, so it leaves me as someone that's looking to apply with a question mark in my head. If I'm a senior developer and they're looking for an entry or a junior developer, well, I probably don't want to waste my time, because I'm more than likely I'm going to be asking more money for that position than what they're willing to pay. And so those are things that I'd want to know before going in and before applying. And as someone that potentially would apply, I might just filter this out, say I don't even want to bother because there's a lack of that information. I say that sounds maybe a little arrogant or conceited or something, but I say that because there is a very high demand for programmers. And so my experience has been that good programmers typically don't have a hard time finding a job, and that a lot of the good programmers are actually poached or taken, try to entice to leave a company rather than out there looking for work. I say that, again, having worked with a lot of companies, having been a part of the hiring process of several of those as well. Job functions, right? A lot of good stuff here, but a lot of stuff that you would expect. Can you develop web-based applications? We're not, through the title, through the position, we're not defining, this doesn't match up to any of those disciplines or categories that we already talked about, but it does, so we're kind of left to guess this on our own. Are you guys looking for a web developer? Are you looking for a client? Are you looking for a server? Are you looking for a DBA? Or are you looking for someone that can kind of do a little bit of it all? And that seems to be, again, you can look at the preferred qualifications, ASP.NET. Okay, I get it. It's probably you're looking for a web developer. But I need to know that information. And you need to know that information as a manager. One, to help hire, and two, to help organize and make sure that your guys, the people that are working for you, are filling the roles that you want them in. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about in-house employees, hiring and managing, and something that you'll see, I think, if you haven't already, is a lot more of a geographically dispersed workforce or geographically dispersed team. I worked for a startup a couple years ago, and we were very diverse. We had 2 guys located in the town that I was from in South Dakota. One guy was out of Fargo, North Dakota, and then one guy was out of Seattle. And then the business owners were back and forth between Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Seattle. And so we have a startup. There's a lot of pressure on those to get things done, get them done rapidly, because there's not a lot of money. There's a never-ending, you're oftentimes in that situation, and particularly, we were trying to create the revenue stream. And so working across, a couple time zones, not a big deal, but the geographic differences, it poses its own unique set of challenges. Now, being that it's programming, and programming can be done on a computer, and computers can be connected to the internet, I think that there are a lot less hurdles overall to do this, to having a technology-based, geographically dispersed workforce. We followed kind of our own modified Scrum Agile workflow, and with that we would have a weekly team meeting, and we would simply use Google Hangouts, a free tool. We'd all get on it, we'd talk through whatever was causing us issues, blocking us, what we were working on and where we were headed. We would use those same Google Hangouts for code reviews or whenever any of us had an issue. So simply by being online during the day, being available, and overall being able to expect when each other would be available, we were able to accomplish quite a bit. In fact, I would almost say that doing, working with somebody over a Google Hangout was almost more effective, because it allowed us to share the screen and look at the code in just an easier format. Now, when Google Hangouts were acting up and we had internet connectivity issues, and of course they are a barrier, but that's pretty rare anymore these days. So the challenges of a geographically dispersed team, while they're there, I think with technology, it is somewhat minimized just because of the tools. Skype, Google Hangout, chat rooms, we'll probably look at in a little bit here. Um, I've worked with some tools on some teams where we had all of our workflow was integrated with GitHub, and a client, and basically a messaging client. And so we could see commits and activity all tied into the GitHub issues, the issue queues, the code commits, everything. It was all very seamless and integrated, and it just really made the work environment, even though we were dispersed, it really just took barriers down incredibly. However, as I touched on earlier, we do need to set expectations. We do need to treat them in a lot of ways as we do our in-house guys, and that is availability. Okay, if you're in just a couple of time zones off, so in the United States, that can still pose a challenge, but a little bit less if they're more time zones away, European or something. Well, then that becomes much more of a challenge. But you still need to, if they're working from home and you're working in an office, we still need to be able to say, I need you to be available during the day. I need some core commitment to be able to reach out and get a hold of you. If you like to work at night and I need someone to work at day, you're probably going to have issues. And so those expectations need to be set up front so that there's no, oftentimes, again, working with a lot of people that have worked from home, they tend to get an expectation that they can, as long as they're getting the work done, they can work whenever they want. And that's fine if that's the expectations that are set. But if you don't set that and that's the way they want to work, it might cause issues because then they might not be available when you need them. Talked about the communication burden, and how I've seen ways and worked with ways that I think really reduce that. And it's becoming more common. You're seeing a lot more of it, and you're seeing, I think, especially with the, I will say younger generations, as I'm in my 30s, they're coming to expect it a little bit more. Why should I go sit in an office for 8 or 9 hours a day when I can do the same exact thing at home, especially with really small companies or really small teams where there's only 1 or 2 people. So just something to keep in mind. Let's see, contractors and outsourcing. I have never outsourced and never been involved in a project where we have, so I can't speak a whole lot to it. I've talked to friends that have done it, and it's been a very hit and miss subject. Some people have success with it. Others have had just nightmares and frustrations because of language, time, culture, actual overall quality, just because they're cheap and they're coming from a certain country doesn't mean that they're going to give you good work. Make sure that if you do go that route, or you're a part of a project or a team that goes that route, you're just very careful about the experience, especially if it's with someone you've never outsourced with before. As far as how you manage your team, if you are outsourcing a project to another company somewhere, how do you interact that team with your team, and do you? Certainly asking a member, one of your developers, to be a lead for an outsourced project is going to put it in, for the most part, is probably going to put a pretty good burden on them. So just be careful how you handle that. Contractors, I can speak to a lot because I've been doing contract work for 10 or 12 years, a little over 10 years. And that role, again, is very different. There's a very different relationship that happens or occurs when you bring contractors in. It all centers around expectations, though. Being able to communicate very, very clearly to them what you expect out of them, what they expect out of you, and come to some mutual ground where you're okay with the relationship moving forward. I got into a contract relationship once where I was just so excited to get involved in the project that I just kind of skipped all my normal processes of defining and exploring expectations. And my expectation was, going into it, I'm a contractor, I do whatever I want, right? You hired me to do the work. How I do it, when I do it, where I do it, that's up to me because I'm a contractor. The employer, well, the person that hired me, were much different. He thought it was going to be more of an employee relationship. I've entered into a contract with you. I need you on site 8 hours a day working for me. And so that caused a lot of tension there at the beginning until communication finally occurred and we set the expectations. Now, bringing contractors in, okay, a lot of issues that will revolve around your team, and that is, how do you integrate them with your team? What kind of projects are they working on? Contractors are still programmers, and all of the other factors that we've talked about are in play. They have personalities. There's a culture that they're coming into. They might not mesh well. They might mesh really well. It's hard to say. You hope with most contractors that it's something they've been doing for a while, and so they're used to and are successful at coming into organizations, adopting how that organization works, and then playing well with others and getting the job done. But it's something that can be it can be very difficult, and so again, I think the key to a successful relationship with a contractor is defining expectations up front, and then defining how they're going to interact with your team. So the last one we'll talk about, just personalities real quick, and I only talk about this just because I see it a lot. I'm a night person. For some reason, when 10 o'clock rolls around at night, I seem to catch a second or third or fourth wind or whatever it is. But then I get this ability to go until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning more times than I should. And if anybody's a Seinfeld fan, it's like morning Josh and night Josh. And night Josh loves it, but morning Josh hates it. Because then in the mornings I'm slow, I'm kind of groggy because I have to get up a little bit earlier than I should. I don't typically get 8 hours. And I don't feel like I'm optimal for quite a few hours. And so, staying up late and then coming in and needing to program early in the morning is not a good thing for me. And just in general, because I've been in that pattern for such a long time, I don't do well in the mornings. And so I find this same thing with a lot of programmers. They tend to burn the midnight oil. And so whether it's a contractor, whether it's outsourcers, whether it's your team, that's up to you to identify and provide them the opportunity to be successful. And if letting them come in late is part of that, it's not that they're coming in late. They're not doing any less work. But if their report time is whenever they want and they put in 8 hours or 9 hours, or they need to be in for at least 4 hours of the day that overlaps with the rest of the organization, it's something to consider to allow them to do. If the requirements are 8 to 5, that's something too. But again, I would caution or caveat that by saying that there are a lot of developers that I'm meeting, and I tend to, because I'm a freelancer and I work with a lot of freelancers, that they don't like that environment. They don't like the restrictions. They don't like someone telling them show up at 8 and leave at 5, because I can do the work anywhere. Me sitting at a desk does not facilitate when 99% of the day I just sit at my desk and program. So it's just, again, something to consider. Every organization has to make their own decisions for what works for them. Heroes, I did want to touch on this just because, again, I've worked with these kind of people, and they're great. They're great until they crash, right? The person that comes in and does everything, and they do it all the time, and they do it really well. And they basically carry an entire team or entire project on their shoulders. And that's awesome. Those people are great to have around, except that they tend to not share them. They take it upon themselves to do all the work, and that leaves a big gap in the team when they're gone on vacation, when they decide to quit, when they get an offer somewhere to get paid more money, when they just burn out and no longer want to do it anymore. And so making sure that workload is balanced, that workload is fair and equitable is very important. What else is there? Introverts, cynics, jerks, just not good programmers. I probably work with all. I'm sure people have classified me in all of those categories at some point in time. And so a lot of personalities. It's no different than any other profession. You're going to be dealing with all sorts of personalities, and it's up to us to identify those and try to play to the strengths, minimize and improve on the weaknesses, and have a great cohesive team. So that's all I have for today, and I will be posting our lecture next week. Again, we're going to follow pretty much a Tuesday, Thursday-ish kind of a format, and just look for information in D2L. If you have any questions, any feedback, any comments, please let me know. Send something to my email or drop a comment in D2L or something. Otherwise, have a good weekend and talk to you guys next week.